I haven't written fiction in over a year. Not because I ran out of ideas, not because I didn't have time, but because something I loved for nearly all of my life stopped making me happy. And I think it's time I explained why. Let's talk about my writing. I know. There are people who get really annoyed when I talk about my own work. They say that it's self indulgent, they say that it's ego. But it's my channel, damn it. I'm going to talk about it. Because why the hell not? And also, people have been asking questions. Politely, indirectly, some not so direct indirectly. What happened? Which is very which is a very loaded question when you're talking about something that used to be your entire personality. Because for a long time, I wasn't just someone who wrote. I was a writer. I was trying to be the writer. All I was missing was a quill. It was embarrassing. And those are two very different things. So I'm Darv James. Here we are. Don't worry, you won't have to tolerate another video about this, but I'm going to answer this question because I keep getting it and people don't want to go back in time. So, like, sub, join the conversation, tell me what you think. Patreon, Substack, channel memberships, and Ko-fi. There we go. The hard sell out the way. Okay, I spent years trying to get an agent. And I mean years. Not months, nothing casual. Years of querying, years of refreshing emails, years of convincing myself that maybe this would be the one, and I came so damn close. I even had an agent at one point. Close enough to taste it. Close enough to get full manuscript requests. Close enough to have conversations with some very important people. Close enough to feel like I wasn't standing outside the nightclub anymore and they would actually let me in, but they never let me in because my trainers weren't cool enough. I did technically have something published, a young adult novel in my early 20s. It was about aliens. There's a whole story there, and I'm not going to rip that one off again, but all I'm going to say is failed is a strong word, but it's the correct word. Less said about it, the better. It exists somewhere, like an old photo of you that someone else took and you don't recognize it anymore. You know it's you, but what the hell was I doing in that shirt? So naturally, I started looking at indie publishing because that's the logical next step that you take. Take control of your work, own your work, build your audience, build your brand, and I won't lie, my lack of confidence in my own writing played a massive role in why I never fully committed to it. But it wasn't just that. There were financial walls, real ones, editing costs, cover costs, formatting costs, marketing costs. That all cost money. Marketing especially. And I run a business in real life. I understand investment. I understand risk. I also understand that when something is unlikely to give you a return, and breaking even is the only goal, really, when it comes to this stuff. And I know, I'm not living the artist dream, but I'm being really honest. I have to be sensible with money. Money is not a bottomless pit. So there we go. And that's not negativity. I get accused of negativity whenever I say that, but that's just reality. But there was also something else too. And this is the part people don't like saying out loud. I don't like a lot of the indie publishing and writing community. Not all of it, obviously. There are some genuinely really good people. There are some really talented people. But I dislike enough of it. There's this constant performance, this constant begging for attention, and I used to receive those emails. This constant noise, and I realised something about myself. I don't want to spend my life trying to convince people to care, especially people who in real life wouldn't give me the time of day, and I wouldn't give them the time of day. People I know wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire. That sounds harsh, but it's honest. My main project, the big one, was this thing called Chosen, and it grew and it grew and it grew until it stopped being a book and became a massive problem. There were prequels, spin-offs, side characters with their own timeline, entire parallel universes, entire histories, entire mythologies. It became less of a novel and more of a cinematic universe. Which sounds impressive until you realise I have to deal with this mess. There was also a side story, a spin-off called Edison, about family of witches in the same universe. Very connected, but barely, and I loved it. But love doesn't make something manageable. It's a huge series, and realistically, publishing on something on that scale independently would be irresponsible. Not creatively irresponsible, but financially irresponsible. And those two things don't always agree. Because the work, when I say there are two very large boxes in my house, packing boxes that contain this entire thing. So yeah, to give you an idea of the scale. Then there was The Slave Prince, which started as a fantasy novel, an idea, and turned into something else. I dumped trauma of my life in 2020 into it, and it was dressed in fantasy clothing. It started as me in probably a little bit of a manic state, writing a single continuous story, 1,500 pages long, one story, no breaks, no mercy, and I hit a wall with that one too. I spent nearly a year splitting it into a trilogy, rewriting, editing, all of that stuff, but that wall hit me hard. And some of it, yes, was financial again, but also time, and kind of an emotional weight to it. And the very real understanding that I could put something out there that was a bit too close to me. And I tried to depersonalize it, and it didn't work. And I just couldn't justify it. Because the personal version was the good version. The depersonalized version felt like Prince of Persia fan fiction. It's a very bizarre situation when so much of you is crammed into a book. And passion doesn't make you immune to the consequences. At the end of 2024, my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and everything stopped. There was no big dramatic moment, by the way. There was no big, cinematic music playing and me looking into the wilderness, ready to embrace the challenges that would come ahead, rethinking every situation and taking it with strength. No. It was quiet, it was emotional. Everything that mattered rearranged itself. Writing stopped feeling important. And when I did write, it wasn't fun. It felt like homework. The worst kind of homework, I might add. The kind where you stare at the page and feel nothing except resentment. The kind that makes you want to throw a book across the room, and that was new for me. Because writing has always been a difficult thing for me, but it never felt pointless until it did. I tried to force it back. I really did. I started a project for members and Patreon people, reading the first draft pages of something new. It was called And We All End Here. It was auto-fiction, or at least my attempt at it. And it stopped being cathartic and it became too personal, too close, too honest in a way that stopped being helpful. And more importantly, it wasn't fun. And that's when I realised something was wrong, because I wasn't writing because I wanted to. I was writing because I didn't know who I was without it. So here's a confession. The day I'm recording this, Monday the 16th of February 26, I haven't written a single piece of fiction since the end of December in 24. Not one sentence, not an idea, not a character, not a paragraph, nothing. And I know how that sounds. It sounds dramatic, ridiculous, impossible even. Because for most of my life, writing wasn't something I did, it was something I was. But here's the truth: if something stops making you happy, put it down. Maybe not forever, not as failure, but as an act of mercy. I used to feel guilty. I felt like I failed. Like I'd let people down, like I'd let myself down. But I don't feel that anymore. And that surprised me. Because I expected grief, but what I found instead was quiet. And strangely enough, since I stopped forcing myself to write fiction, I started creating again. This channel became alive in a way it hadn't been for a long time. Because I wasn't trying to become anything, I was just talking. And that's a very different energy. I don't know if I will ever write fiction again. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I don't think of that as failure anymore. I think of it as retirement. That version of me did his job. He tried, he cared, he built entire worlds out of nothing, and maybe he earned his rest. Maybe he's on a beach somewhere. You know,